Hello and welcome to the Supernatural Fandom Track here at Continual. I'm your host, Gail Z. Martin, and tonight we're talking about how family always has your back, especially the supernatural family. So before we get started and start talking about that in depth, I'd like to have my fellow panelists have a chance to introduce themselves. Ian?
Hey, how you doing? Ian J. Malone, honored as always to be doing these things with you folks. So thanks for having me. I am author of Freebird Rising in the Four Horsemen universe, military science fiction universe. I'm also author of the Mako Saga, and my newest book is called Detron City Vice, which is set in that same kind of space opera sci-fi adventure universe. So yeah, blessed to be here as always.
Great. And Michelle?
Well, and I thank you guys for having me back. I love doing these and having these chats with you guys. My name is Michelle Crowley. I am a lecturer at Northern Kentucky University, and I teach popular culture, communication, and my research is in fan studies.
And her last name really is Crowley.
Yes.
Laurena?
Hi, thanks, Gail, for having us all. I'm Laurena Aker. I'm an author and editor. I represent actually two fandoms. For the Twilight fandom, I'm the author of the book Fan Phenomena, The Twilight Saga. For Supernatural, I'm the managing editor of the largest supernatural fan site, the Winchester Family Business.
So we're all coming to fandom and at fandom from some very different angles, which makes for good conversation. One of the things that Supernatural really has at its heart is family. Both the family that you have no choice about being born into and the family that you find and that you gather around yourself. And of course, there's that famous comment by Bobby about how family don't end with blood. And this fandom, more than many others, has taken that to heart in terms of really creating itself as SPNFamily. And so I guess for starters, I know I think all of us have been in multiple fandoms and may still be in multiple fandoms. How's the Supernatural fandom different in your experience than maybe some of the other fandoms that you've been part of? And I'm going to go around backwards this time by who's on my screen in what order, which is different for everybody, and start with Laurena.
Thank you. The Supernatural fandom I've been involved with more deeply than any other fandom. Twilight, you would think, since I go to conventions and wrote a book and, am deeply involved in that now, I wasn't as involved with it during the height of its popularity. So the Supernatural fandom is probably the one that I've been in most extensively. Of course, there's Star Trek and Star Wars and Harry Potter and, all the other ones that I've done since going back till I was probably 5 years old. I've been in genre fandoms. But the Supernatural fandom, I think, is unique from what I've observed because of the participation of the actors one-on-one with people live at the conventions. You also have social media, and that was just breaking in around 2005 when Supernatural and coincidentally Twilight both were hitting shelves or hitting your screens. So social media has made a huge difference in how the fandom not only interacts with itself worldwide, but interacts with the actors on a very personal level, just, one-on-one with people that you can tweet something and get a reply from them, which was beforehand unheard of. So I think there's a very personal connection, not only with other fans, but tying it all together with the actors.
Mm-hmm. Michelle.
Well, kind of to piggyback off of that, I actually have a story about the celebrities responding to us. I taught a class last semester in our college's pop culture discipline, and it was on Supernatural. And as a joke, I told my students, this is pre-crazy times. And I told my students, like, you know, if you could get Jared or Jensen to come to or talk to our class, you guys can all have A's. And if you get Misha, then everyone gets an A on their midterm. Anybody else is just bonus. Well, we ended up having 11 people associated with the show, actors, writers, cosplayers, including Misha, came and spoke to our class via Zoom. And it was the most surreal experience. It's like sitting here and, oh, hey, Mark Shepard just logged on. Hey, how's it going? And it was, I can't even put it into words. At some point I need to and write it up. But yeah, I mean, the fact that that was even on the table is something that is so phenomenal about this fandom. And the fact that Kim Rhodes was our first one to respond. And the fact that she's just like, yeah, sure, let's chat. And we literally talked about everything from her cats and her dogs to the perception and viewing of the middle to older age female on TV shows. So it was, I mean, it was great. It was like a convention in our classroom. It was great. But also with the fandom, even though I'd been a fan of the show for a while, I didn't actually step into the fandom and become involved with the fandom until about the last 2.5 years ago. And started to really meet some people and kind of connecting with them on that different level. So, you know, like I've been a part of other fandoms in the past and wrote fan fiction and all that, but Supernatural was really the first fandom that I found myself in my adult life. And so seeing things from my, I don't know, jaded perspective of having been in different fandoms and watch them rise and fall and all of that, and just seeing how this group, how this family comes together. And you know, it's like a big reunion every convention you go to. Even if you go to every convention, it's you know, you meet friends and you meet old friends, and it's absolutely crazy.
But in the best possible way.
In the best possible way. But then again, Supernatural's always been about that.
This is true. Ian?
Yeah, I mean, I wholly agree with what she just said about the access that, you know, that we as fans have to the members of that show, whether it's through social media or whether it's, you know, their frequency of the, you know, the cons and whatnot and conventions. You know, they are legendary for that, whether it's Jensen and Jared or whether it's the supporting cast or the crew. Supernatural, any con I go to, those folks are always ranked up there among like the best people that fans hope to run into. You hear stories across the board about, well, I ran into Misha Collins. This is what he had. He was amazing. I saw him in the, you know, karaoke bar or whatever. And they just come across like real people. And I think anytime you meet someone that has a larger than life persona, whether it's an actor, an actress, or you know, or a pro athlete. I was lucky this past week to interview a NASCAR driver that I follow on the circuit because I'm a race fan, on a podcast that I run, and it was a total fluke that I got him. He was making jokes about my home state of Florida on a very prominent podcast that he's a part of, and I shot his PR rep a email as a joke and was just like, all right, my man's going to throw shade at my home state. Like, he totally needs to come on my show and own up to that. And he did. So, you know, getting a chance to speak with him and interact with him on a very personal level and realize that, wow, this is exactly the same guy that I've come to see on my television screen every Sunday. Just an amazing experience. So anytime as fans we get that, it's always a lot of fun. I think another thing that makes Supernatural fandom different for me is, you know, the whole notion of family and community. Listen, we as human beings can relate to that all day long because we're tribal people. You know, we long for that. Everything in us cries out to be a part of something, be a part of gatherings, be a part of community, to have that crew, to have those people behind us, interact, share experiences. That's what we do. That's who we are. And, you know, I've been a part of a lot of fandom, you know, being a Gen Xer, Star Trek was naturally my heyday in the 1990s because everything Star Trek was everywhere, whether it was TNG, whether it was DS9, whether it was Voyager. You know, I mean, I went to conventions, I had the costumes, I met actors, I did all of that. Supernatural for me, I think, was different because this notion of family and community is central to the show. That theme is the DNA of what makes Supernatural Supernatural. It's borne out in story after story and season after season. And it's one of the things that makes it so accessible to everyday people like you or me. And, you know, you couple that with, you know, the reverence that the people who make this show happen, whether it's the actors or crew, have for their audience, and the fact that they are so ready to tell you it's because of you guys, the fans, that we get to do this awesome job every year. Thank you so much. You put all that together, and it's no wonder that Supernatural fandom is what it is, because that is the example that's set forth for us by the stories that are told and the people who tell them every week and every season and every year on our television screens. And we can't not be that way for that.
No, I totally agree. And it's interesting because I've also been part of fandom since I was in early high school at the least. And back in the day, and I'm going to date myself here, but in the late 70s, conventions weren't nearly as well organized or nearly as
Accepted.
or as accepted. There weren't nearly as many. And something like Creation that runs a well-oiled machine and that is a kind of a for-profit entity running these were all volunteer-run conventions, like many of the small literary and local cons still are. And you might get a couple hundred people, and they're all there because mostly authors, and you probably got maybe a B-list, C-list, whoever you could afford media guest whose show hadn't been on for 20 years, but we were all very fond of it, and a little bit of vendor room, and that was it. But we all got to talk about all this stuff nobody else wanted to hear from us. Well, those media guests that showed up were not at the height of their career. Even at the beginning of that, the Star Trek guys, you know, there were years there after the original show went off the air, they couldn't get arrested. And then finally the movies came back in and it all came up. But I remember running into George Takei in the elevator and just having a nice little chat with him on the way up to get chili at the green room, you know. And the guy who was the pilot in Space 1999 wandered into a room party because we had free beer and just sat down on the floor and drank beer and told us about all the stuff behind the scenes. And I you know, my craziest story with that was the year Empire Strikes Back came out, and it was in the theaters, and David Prowse, the guy who, he wasn't the voice of Darth Vader, but he was the body in the Vader suit, was there. And things were so organic at some of these cons. He said, well, let's just go see it. So a bunch of us got on a city bus in Columbus with David Prowse, went to a movie theater, bought tickets, and sat there and watched Empire Strikes Back with him. And he narrated all the things that, you know, went wrong behind the scenes. And, oh, I tripped there, and, you know, all this, which of course would never happen. But the Supernatural cons remind me of that camaraderie with better security. In that there is that accessibility, there is that, you know, you go to some of the bigger conventions, and out of necessity, they're whisked in and whisked out, and you just, you know, they're moving through all the secret tunnels. That, you know, that piece of convention is very fond to me because it was, they were more in our, you could almost reach out and touch them. Well, actually, you could have handed the guy a beer. And of course, there's safe distance and everything. The guys have security, but they're still much more accessible to us than pretty much anybody else out there. And I want to come back to what Ian said about family. And yes, family don't end with blood, the whole concept of family. But how much the supernatural fandom takes that to heart. I mean, I've seen other fandoms that will run a GoFundMe for somebody who's had medical expenses or something, come together for some of those things, but not on the scale and the regularity that the supernatural fandom does. We're just everywhere doing all kinds of good stuff. Michelle, what do you think? Where do you think all that comes from?
I really don't want to have to give him all the credit, but boy, Misha Collins is really heading that stuff up between him and Rachel with Random Acts and all of the just shenanigans that Random Acts gets into. Anything from, you know, viewing parties to literally doing Random Acts to Gish, sponsoring Gish and the bringing a little bit of chaotic good to the world. And I also feel like it's just kind of operating just kind of in the background. You know, we're not, you know, you're not necessarily in Random Acts, you're not necessarily in the fandom in order to gain notoriety. It's just like, yeah, I feel like I want to do this. And I don't know, maybe it's just the spirit of the show, but we just seem to all have this wanting to give back and wanting to give to the rest of the world and back to the earth, that I don't know, we just kind of all flock together into this family.
Mm-hmm. Laurena?
I totally agree with that. I mean, I think Gish breaks down a lot of inhibitions, and Random Acts gives you an outlet with all of its various drives. I would also say some of the other programs, I don't think I want to call them programs, but the movements like Jared's Always Keep Fighting has brought people together with very personal anxieties or depressions or whatever they've been dealing with personally. So it makes the fandom coalesce around things that they maybe don't talk to other people about. And therefore they want to give back then to support people they feel are still maybe holding back or haven't come as far as they have in their journey. You can have Jensen and Misha's You're Not Alone, you know, all of those movements or beliefs or whatever, I think has made people say, wow, if you can do that for me, it's really reached me in a way that other people haven't, you know, maybe not even therapists, or I haven't gone to therapists, or my family doesn't understand. And so I want to give that level of support to the next person and pay it forward. So I think, again, the show deserves a lot of credit for the boys. I always have your back. No one's left behind. Family owned and with blood. You know, all of that. But I think it's a lot of these other things that the other and all of them have. You know, Alzheimer's from what's his name? I'll think of it in a second. They all have something that is close to their hearts and touches people. And then I would say, in addition to that, some of the fan movements, like the book Family Don't End with Blood, or the one that's just come out now, There'll Be Peace When You're Done, by Lindsay Burness, those also reach out to people in all different ways. It's not only just depression or anxiety, or people that have had a stroke, or, you know, were bullied as a child, but now it's getting into people that were underrepresented groups and haven't felt like they've seen themselves in any kind of pop culture before. So all those things, I think, reach people on a very personal level, and they feel gratitude and obligation, and it opens their heart, and they want to share it with other people. David Hayden Jones, that's it.
Yeah.
It was going through my head, and I was like, I know that guy. Okay, so I think all those things come together to make people really want to give to other people in the fandom and in their community.
Well, and you know, Jensen has done fundraisers for Down syndrome because I believe he has a nephew with Downs.
Right.
And Richard Speight has done things for stroke care because, you know, he tells that story very movingly in Family Don't End with Blood, where he had a stroke at one of the conventions and
That's
got Rob Benedict has done things for stroke care because of that. And then, I mean, his story is very much how the cast and the fandom came and rallied around him and helped him survive. So yeah, that all of those things. And I was so blown away when I found out that there was a peer support network in conjunction with I'm Alive for training Supernatural fans to be a first line contact for people who are depressed or maybe, you know, thinking of suicide to help give them somebody who can speak the same language. I've never seen that anywhere else. I was just totally blown away. Ian?
Yeah, no, wholly agree. I think another thing that makes this show so easy to love as a fan, you know, you talk about the different organizations, the different movements and things that the actors and crew have assembled, you know, but I'd like to go back to the story of, you know, Misha Collins taking a Zoom call for a college class at Western Kentucky. I mean, if I've heard a story like that about this crew, I've heard a dozen or 2 dozen or 3 dozen. All right. That's those sorts of stories of selflessness on behalf of the cast and the crew is it's everywhere if you look around. And I think that as a fan makes it very easy to get behind them. I mean, listen, we live in 2020, all right? Everybody's got, so I shouldn't say everybody, so many people have an agenda, all right? There are many, many celebrities out there who have foundations and organizations and things to benefit causes and raise awareness. And that's great because, you know, the end is certainly justifies the means. But if you look beneath the surface, you can get a glimpse from some of these folks that it's part of the PR arm. Nothing could be further from the truth when you start talking about the Supernatural cast and crew, because so much of what they do is so organic. Hey, heard there's a need in Western Kentucky. Sure, we'll take that call. Absolutely. When do we need to be on the line? Because there's so much of that out there, it makes them very easy to get behind them for this stuff because it's so genuine and it is so organic. You can't not root for that. You can't not want to be a part of it.
Yeah, one of the folks who wasn't able to join us tonight was one of the people who organized CouchCon early in the pandemic. And of course, it was very close to the beginning where everybody was just sort of stuck sitting at home. Nobody had sort of figured out what to do with themselves yet and said, okay, let's just put this together and we're a bunch of fans and we'll see what happens. And darned if Osric Chow didn't show up. And there were several of the stars that just, hey, can I play? And then they were sitting at home with nothing to do either. And Michelle, like you said, you know, maybe somebody reached out to them just thinking this was a lark to say, hey, we're doing this thing this weekend if you don't have anything better to do. And they showed up and had a lovely conversation with people. That was one of the things that really blew me away when I went to my first Supernatural convention, because like I said, been going to cons for a long time. They bring the person in, put them behind the podium, they talk, they take a couple of questions, they go out the back. That's it. I thought they'd come on stage and talk a little about the next season coming up and you know, kind of do the PR shuffle and talk a little bit about their characters, yada, yada, and off they go. And I'm blown away with these guys getting these very, not improperly personal questions, but the first person who walked up there and said, so last week in Denver, you said this, and I just wanted to follow up on this. I'm going, holy hell, they're like the Grateful Dead followers. These are like parrot heads and deadheads. You were in Denver last week? And how trusting how very open the conversation was, unscripted, clearly unscripted. People talking about vulnerabilities and having real person conversations. And I was totally blown away. I did not expect that. And I was so happy it's what I got, but I was just really blown away at the reciprocity between the actors and the fans.
I think the actors also talk about how much those cons mean to them, how personal they are behind the stage, how they've been a support network for the actors. And they've talked about how lonely acting is and you don't get a lot of genuine friendships. And so you feel them really bonding with each other on stage. And they talk about that. I dare anyone to go to a Kim Rhodes panel and not end up in tears. When that woman starts up on her history and openly discusses all she's had to overcome, I cannot sit through one without tears just streaming down my face. And that kind of, as you said, Gail, that openness, that vulnerability is so unusual. And I think if you go back also to the show, everybody says it starts with the boys. Absolutely, on and off stage starts with the boys. But Sam and Dean as characters are also just your everyday guys. And they're the ones that didn't have anything growing up and didn't have a good family situation and had to teach themselves everything and come from the broken home. And so as characters, the fandom can also relate a lot to, they're not the perfect household and I see myself in them. And then Jared and Jensen bring that to the friendship that they have with both the fans and the other cast members. So it opens the cast up into a very, very trusting environment. They've said the set is the most trusting environment they've ever been on. So when you have that trust that somebody is not going to make fun of you or ridicule you or, set you out for airing your dirty laundry or something, then you're like, okay, this is safe. I can do this. And the fans feel that, so they do that for themselves, and then they feel they can help other people likewise.
I'd kind of like to actually dovetail off of that point. Jensen Ackles was recently a guest on Michael Rosenbaum's podcast, and it was recorded just before the announcement was made that he's going to be joining the boys for season 3 on Amazon. And so the big question was, all right, well, what are you doing? Supernatural's coming to a close. What are you doing? And Jensen said, I'll be announcing that here shortly. We've got some things in line and we're really excited to bring those out, but not quite yet. And Rosenbaum put the question to him, well, are you going to do something drastically different? Like so many actors, whenever they come off of, whenever they come off of a long run of playing the same character, like immediately they want to snap the rubber band back the other direction and do something that's just completely off the wall different. Is that what you're going to do? And Ackles' response, I thought, was perfect. He just said, you know what? I'm really not. He said, I've spent 15 years investing into the character that is Dean Winchester. And I love this character and I love everything that he is. He is really kind of the amalgam of everything I grew up with, from John McClane to you name it, woven into this character that has become Dean Winchester. The fans love this character as much as I do. And I would never take a job, particularly right on the heels of this show, that would jeopardize that vision of who Dean Winchester is. I would never do anything that could possibly tarnish that, or that would be just too much of a jump for them. They've invested too much into me as an actor to be able to do what I do for a living. And that will always be at the forefront of my mind when I take a job. And I thought, holy crap, man, that's them some pretty big words right there, brother. And that's why, these actors very much fall into that category of fan favorites, along with the Hugh Jackmans of the world, the Henry Cavills of the world, because they're so honored to do what they do. And that comes across as so genuine. As a fan, I can't not get behind that.
Yes, thank heavens nobody felt the need to have a Hannah Montana moment.
Right.
We really didn't need that.
We're not there yet. I mean,
No.
Jared did cut his hair.
It's true. Okay. But still, Michelle?
Sorry, I was really kind of listening to that. I forgot what the parent question was here.
I've forgotten what the question was by now, but
Okay.
Basically how the trust on stage and the reciprocity between the cast and the fans and how unusual that is.
Oh yeah, and I think like Ian was saying, that we've heard so many stories about how trusting and how wonderful it is on set, and that they bring that then to the conventions, and it kind of then spreads out into fandom. And I think I think this is going to be airing well after the season has ended, correct?
Yeah.
And so with Castiel's big reveal in episode 18 with Dean, and I've been watching my Twitter feed, and I tend to have a lot of Destiel fans. And also, what kind of was surprising to me was the amount of people that, after that came out, and then Misha's interview the following weekend, was how many people felt secure and at peace with themselves to come out. And I think that that's definitely a hallmark of the series, that between the cast, between the crew, between the storyline, and between the fans, we all have this trust, even though sometimes, we'll be at each other's throats about, this, that, or the other thing. But at the end of the day, we're still safe to come out to. We're still safe to talk to and to make ourselves vulnerable to. And I'm not really sure any other situation that would be the case. I don't know. It was just, I'd seen a couple posts on Twitter to that extent, and I'm kind of shaking my head. I'm like, wow, what other phenomenon really in a situation like this, what else would lead a bunch of people to say, you know what, I'm not straight, or I am straight, or whatever, however they've come out. And it's just, I don't know, it's a really good feeling to be a part of something like this. And then, all right, full disclosure, I was one of those people that came out. And Mark Shepard was the first one to like my tweet because he follows me. And
Oh, wow.
it was so validating. Yeah. So, yeah, that's my story.
I think one of the other things that is so unusual is that we've also, in that trust, the fans have given the cast permission and space to try a lot of new things and take some risks. You see those first con pictures of getting Jensen up there with his guitar and telling them, now I'm just going to close my eyes and pretend you're not here. You're not allowed to make any noise. I'm going to sing the song I sing to my daughter. And then they clap or something and goes, shh, you're not here. You're not here. And the only way he could get through it was shutting his eyes and pretending they weren't there. And now look at Mr. Rockstar Jensen Ackles. I mean, just inhabiting that part and owning it and having so much confidence in bringing out his album and all of this. And you talked about Kim Rhodes, but also Brianna Buckmeister and the things that she's talked about and some of her struggles. And now you've got people who, okay, maybe they won't ever be the Rolling Stones, but they've got the confidence to perform in front of an audience that they know loves them and respects them and supports them, to go try and do things and stretch their wings. And that's a wonderful reciprocal gift to people who are in a business where putting on a good face is so important. And fronting, no matter what's going on, and they don't with us. And that's such a gift. With that, I think the other thing, just to bring up, since we're recording this on the heels of the election, is, get Misha out there with the largest phone bank in history or something like that. It may not have been, but it sure was huge. And I looked at all the people who were on it and going, well, hell yes, if I hadn't already voted and Osric Chow called me and asked me to vote, sure I'd be out there. Using that fame for good. It turns out Stacey Abrams is a huge Supernatural fan. I did not know she was also a best-selling romance author. That was out there today. You go, girl. But I love this reciprocal respect. Comments on that, because you've been around the fandom probably for more years than some of the rest of us, Laurena.
Yeah, I would say, and I've had a lot of conversations with the actors. Yes, of course, at cons, where you go up to them in autograph lines, but also in press rooms and backstage and different things like that, because of the Winchester family business access that I have and credentials that I have for writing about the cons and the various promotions that they're doing. I have been really impressed with how much growth these actors have experienced because of the fandom and because of each other. I've never really understood the life of an actor, how lonely it is, how you're constantly putting yourself out there because you have to dig deep for emotions to get into roles. So you go into an audition or you go into a role and you have to go places that people don't normally show to the public. You might have to cry, you might have to love, you might have to get angry, you might, whatever it is. And these actors, I just kind of had this image that they were all ready for doing this. They were all prepared or they wouldn't have chosen this career. And what I've learned through the books and through talking to them and behind the scenes and what they've revealed publicly in social media and at cons is how much, as you said, like coming out in the Saturday night specials with trusting themselves to try music or to try poetry or to try another role, or they go into theater and 4 or 5 of their castmates travel to show up to be in the audience. So always giving them the support they need to grow as much as the fandom has grown. I've really been touched by that. And it's opened my eyes a lot to how much the fandom means to the cast.
Yeah. And you just don't hear that from other fandoms. Mm-hmm. Even the ones where people really are nice. You just don't hear that. In fact, Laurena, I think when you and I met for the first time, those were my first 2 questions to you. Are the boys really as nice as the theme? And do they really get along that well? Because I'd been knocking around fandom for so long, I wasn't sure if I could believe that. And I felt so good when you said yes to both things.
When I first joined the fandom, I joined the same way everyone else did. You watch the show, and then I got online, and then I started reading all these things. And I was watching French Mistake, yeah. And there's that line about, well, the boys aren't talking to each other. And at least, now we've got them talking to each other. I was devastated. I thought that meant that truly Jared and Jensen didn't get along, and that the show had built up this whole make-believe about them being best friends. And I just was, I thought, that's it. I can't believe it, where the stars are so false. So it took me a long time to dig in and get other people to say, no, the French Mistake was not real. That was all just a spoof. So yeah, to find out that everything is as real as we believe it to be, truly, in talking to these people, that means a lot. That means you can trust what they're saying, and having, you said it was Mark Shepard that gave you validation, that means something, because he's being genuine. And he's not doing it because he wants popularity or, he wants Entertainment Weekly to notice that he just did that. He's doing it personally from him to you. So I think that's saying a lot.
Yeah, it is, especially, again, for those of us who've knocked around conventions for a long time. Inevitably, you end up meeting some favorites who don't live up to expectations. And maybe they just had a bad day, or maybe they're not really a nice person, but it ruins it for you. And so to find out these guys really are as nice as they come across, and maybe even nicer, well, it's just kind of mind-blowing. Ian?
Yeah, oh yeah. Well, I was just going to say shout out to James Marsters as my one of my favorite con interactions. I ran into him at Dragon Con before the con had really gotten kicking. I guess my last time there, which has been a few years now, and super nice guy. And I don't know if it was because, again, the con just wasn't really slamming just yet, so it was relatively quiet out on the Walk of Fame, and there weren't a ton of people around. But we sat there for 5-10 minutes just shooting the breeze about everything from where Angel was going to go in season 6 had it not been canceled, to Smallville, to Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, and just a super nice, super genuine guy that was every bit as cool as you would hope Spike would be. So anyway, just a little personal story there. I had a ball with James Masters Dragon Con. Great dude.
James
Michelle.
Masters was also my first convention interaction ever.
Yeah.
And it was actually in Fort Lauderdale. And a friend of mine, we went together and we're both standing in line and like, we're both almost hyperventilating. And he goes, "You guys are nervous, aren't you?" And it's like, "Yeah." He goes, "You ever did this before?" "No." He goes, "Come here. You're getting a selfie with me." And we just sat there and just talked for 4 or 5 minutes each. And it was a real small con. And yeah, it was like a Friday afternoon. But yeah, like I've got a selfie with James Masters, and it's just like, yep, that's my very first celebrity interaction at a convention, and it was phenomenal. There's my James Masters story.
I don't have a James Marster story, although I do feel compelled to point out he played, he was on Supernatural, right?
Yes.
Yeah. He and Willow did the witch couple that were having
Yes.
marital trouble. No, I was at a very small convention, and Leo from Charmed was one of the media guests, and there was nobody there. There was nobody there. We were all just sitting there looking at our phones going, "When can I leave? When can I leave?" And the poor guy is stuck behind this table looking miserable. And he was bored enough to talk to me. So we had a very nice conversation and kind of rescued each other for about 10 minutes. But getting back to, kind of coming into the closing remarks here, as my phone just loudly reminded me, what's your takeaway? We're wrapping up this 15th year. Jensen and Jared have both been oddly really loud about how this isn't supposed to be forever. They'll come back to it. They really want to come back to it. Oddly specific and very loud. But what do you think is going to happen to the Supernatural family here now, that we don't have a bunch of new episodes coming out all the time? Laurena?
That is the $1 million question, I think. I am truly going to say that I'm going to wait and see. I know that I've talked to you about this, and you've seen so many other fandoms. Twilight, that is 15 years old now at this point, and Stephanie just put out a new book, and it sold millions of copies in the first few days. And yet everybody thought the Twilight fandom had completely dispersed and was never going to come back together again. So I'm kind of waiting to see what coalesces around, whether it's random acts, truly because of my website, we're wondering the same thing. We're thinking, okay, are people going to stay and want to keep talking? Are they going to go off to watch The Boys for Jensen and Walker for Jared and whatever movies Misha happens to do, and go off in all little factions? I know that the right answer is that we're all going to be together and we're going to, forever and ever. But my truthful answer is I don't know. I've never seen anything like this before. And I'm kind of going to wait and see. I know I'm going to be here. Mm-hmm. And I know our website's going to be here. As long as people want to come, we're going to host that. They have some place to talk to each other. They have community. I know on social media, there's all kinds of groups, and I know Creation wants to hold the cons just as long as they possibly can. Mm-hmm. And the people that have those tickets that renew before you even leave the place, those gold tickets, yeah, me too. Boy, they've got us coming and going. So, you know, how long can we keep spending that kind of money? Well, maybe a long time if Jared and Jensen and Misha keep showing up. So I'm going to wait and see. I'm anxious to hear what everybody else thinks.
Yeah, Michelle?
I think the supernatural fandom is going to act like any family who, I think we can kind of liken this to maybe losing a matriarch or patriarch. So if you have that grandma or grandpa in your family that kind of held everybody together, and once they pass, you're kind of left with maybe some small groups, some small factions, like you and your closest cousins kind of stick together, and you know, you don't necessarily talk to anybody, but you know, when there's another funeral or a wedding, you know, we're all there. So I think everyone is going to kind of go their separate ways, but if there is the movie or a rebirth of the series or whatever, I think we're all just gonna be right back where we were. I think it's, you know, there's gonna be some people that drop off, but oh well, you know, the people that matter will still be people that matter to us, I guess, like our closest little circles. We're gonna be there for each other.
Ian?
Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and dial up the firefly analogy here, and that is that we're all gonna go our own separate ways, but whenever somebody hits the button that it's time to come home, we're all gonna be coming right back to where we know we're supposed to be. And we'll all be coming with arms wide open and smiles on our faces, because it'll be just like getting back together with the old crew after a whole lot of years have gone by. And you raise glasses and you talk about old times, you talk about what's happened since, and you just revel in rekindling those relationships. And that's never not a good time. I don't care if you're talking about old friends from high school or your favorite television show coming back on the air for one last hurrah. You will always come back for that when you're as passionate about something as the fan base is for this franchise. So yeah, just gonna go ahead and roll with the Serenity crew on that one. Just hit the button and I'll be back.
You know, I agree. And I think that there are going to be some people who were more casual fans and they'll go on to the next thing. But then there's that diehard base, and Supernatural's diehard base is deep and wide. And I think the people for whom the show has been a life-changing event are going to remain very active, because we do have social media and the conventions and all of these other things to reinforce each other. I'm finding it really interesting that Jensen and Daniil started their own production company with strong Warner Brother ties, and how many interviews recently he and Jared have both said, this isn't the end, we might hang it up for a few years, this isn't the end. And I'm thinking, nobody says that. Nobody just says, yes, you know, I want to come back and do more of this. They offer you platitudes, and I'm thinking, no, these guys are really saying it, and they wouldn't lie to the fandom. Those guys wouldn't lie to the fandom. And so I do think we'll see more. But in the meantime, I think the people for whom it's changed their lives are going to stick around, and that's okay, because that's kind of the core. And people can come back in again the next time there's something to draw them there. Well, folks, we are at the end of our time, and thank you so much for being here with me tonight and talking about our favorite show. And thank you, folks, for watching us. We will have more Supernatural coming up in continual. In the meantime, we'll see you online.